to Beyond Well with Sheila Hamilton. I'm here again with Dr. Jim Polo, and he has had a remarkable recovery from a knee replacement. So, Dr. Polo, it's so great to see you up, walking, and helping us again.
Oh, Sheila, thank you very much. I do feel great. I do feel
Yeah.
great that I'm now up and walking.
I have had this question from so many of our listeners who live with loved ones that they're deeply concerned about regarding their mental health. They don't quite know what it is that you say to someone who may be in need of a mental health intervention, or at least a look-see under the hood. So could you guide us through some of the things we should be thinking about when we want to approach someone we love who we may be concerned about?
Yeah, this is a really timely question because right now we have so many folks that are certainly suffering with all kinds of symptoms related to fear and concern about the ongoing pandemic. I think one of the first things I would urge family members to think about is that the first step to helping somebody is just recognizing that there are some signs and symptoms that might be worrisome to you. In general, when folks are starting to have those kinds of symptoms that relate to any kind of a mental health type challenge, you'll see changes from their baseline. It's not important really to worry about trying to label those changes. It can be quite helpful to simply explain what you're observing. So the first thing I would recommend is that if you're worried about somebody else, before you jump in and try to help, do a little bit of research yourself. What are the kinds of signs and symptoms that would maybe, first of all, help me think about the fact that somebody's struggling? So, for example, what are the basic signs and symptoms of depression? The symptoms might be trouble sleeping. The symptoms might be social withdrawal. It might include, being down and not wanting to engage in the activities that usually cause joy. Now, the reason why I'm sharing that is because one of the key ways that you approach somebody who's having mental health difficulties is, first of all, not trying to pass judgment, but simply explaining what you're observing in a factual manner that's non-judgmental. Because remember, folks that are struggling have a whole world of emotions that are going on inside their head. And part of what you want to do is you want to share with them just simply what you're observing. So recognizing those signs and symptoms and then articulating only what you're observing without passing judgment is kind of that first step to helping somebody. So, I'll try to walk through an example on this. Let's say that your spouse has been getting more and more irritable. They're getting short with their temper. Maybe they're coming home from work upset, or maybe they're leaving for work late. And you just notice that there's a change. So one of the first ways that you can begin to get inside to help this individual is, first of all, just putting that on the table without any judgment. Hey, I've noticed that you've really been tense lately. It's a statement. It's not a judgment. It's just an observation. Hey, I've noticed that you really haven't talked a lot lately about anything that's going on. So, the reason why I share that is, remember that when folks are struggling with an emotional challenge, they have a world that's going on inside, that this is their internal narrative. If they're resistant to think that they have a mental health problem, they're going to be very resistant to sharing anything about that narrative that's going on. Mm-hmm. And if you just come at somebody and say, hey, I think you're depressed, you need help. It's almost like an assault. That individual already is struggling with this internal narrative that doesn't even make sense to them in the first place. Mm-hmm. You're already in a position where you may come across as passing judgment. And the ironic thing is, you may be 100% correct. You may be correct that they are indeed depressed and they need help. But that's not the how. That's not how you get there. Okay?
It feels also really important to me, Dr. Polo, to mention that many people who are beginning to feel these signs and symptoms are very defensive about it, and that many of them, when you say, I'm noticing that you're more irritable, will say, you make me that way. You drive me crazy. You do things that make me so upset I can't stand living here. So talk to people about the defensive reaction and how to cope with that.
Yeah, that's a great lead in to what I was thinking about. Very often when folks are dealing with a mental health problem, it can be challenging being around them. So let's be honest about this. When somebody else is struggling with a mental health problem, our tendency is to tell them, hey, just snap out of it. What's wrong with you? Because the reality is we don't see the world from their perspective. And so the key is actually to help that individual kind of open up. So, for example, just using exactly what you just said, a great response would be, help me understand what you're feeling then.
Mm.
Or share with me what you would like me to understand about what you're experiencing right now. In other words, you're very carefully asking them to share something that's internal, but you're
Mm.
giving them the leeway to share what they want to share without any judgment. Okay. There's two
That's
concepts in
beautiful.
here that I will offer. The first concept is narrating. Okay. Sharing a little bit about what you're thinking and feeling factually, first of all, sets the tone for what you're really modeling you would like them to do.
Mm.
And then gently giving them the control on how they're going to share what's going on. And the key thing here is that it doesn't work the first time. And sometimes it doesn't work after 2 or 3 times. You have to demonstrate, first of all, that you really truly care. You really are genuinely interested, to make it safe for that person to open up. So, for example, I've been very worried about you. I've noticed that you seem withdrawn. What would you like me to know about what you're feeling? What would you like me to know about how you're experiencing things right now?
Mm.
So you're offering, first of all, a statement that is just kind of, non-judgmental,
Mm-hmm.
and you're giving them the leeway to open up and share what they want rather than tell me what's wrong.
Mm.
It's a very subtle distinction
Yeah.
because, I'll be honest, I went through this with my wife many years ago. My wife went through a severe period of depression, and I got frustrated. We had everything.
Mm.
Um, we were both physicians. We were doing fine financially. We had a great house, living in a wonderful neighborhood. Our 3 kids, all under the age of 10, were in all their different activities. Everybody was healthy. My
Mm.
wife was clearly depressed.
Wow.
And, I knew that she was depressed, but I couldn't understand why she would be depressed. I'm like, hey, snap out of it. Everything's great. Whatever it is
Yeah.
that you're thinking doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to me. Therefore, I was assuming, how could it possibly make sense to her?
Mm.
So rather than trying to understand what she was experiencing internally, I was trying to tell her what she needed to do. Hey, darling, I don't know why you're down today. I think everything's great. Let's just go to soccer practice. I don't get this.
Yeah.
And what I found out is the more that I pushed, the more she became shut down. And what I
Mm.
found out later on is that she had all kinds of conflicting feelings going on inside. And the more I pushed and the more I pointed out, the more she felt like, okay, he's right. There's something wrong with me.
Mm.
He's right. This doesn't make any sense. He's right. I'm a failure. The more she put herself down, the less she was willing to actually open up.
It's so comforting to hear that even as a psychiatrist that you've had difficulties, because I think that this is probably one of the most landmine-filled territories that people can walk through with people they love. There is the other issue of actually getting someone who has never in their life considered getting any kind of counseling or professional help, introducing that. Maybe you might want to see someone or talk to someone. Walk us through that next step of how, when you can't get them to actually open up, suggesting that someone else might be capable of doing so.
This is a very tender area, and let me tell you why this is a very challenging approach. Remember that we all have stigma to some degree, whether we like it or not. We just
Mhm.
do. Something's wrong with our arm. We just naturally think we need to go get it seen and fixed. Something's wrong
Mhm.
with our mind, our emotions. We just automatically jump to the fact that there must be something defective.
Mm.
Stigma plays a huge role, not only in the individual that's feeling that there's a mental health challenge, but as well as the individual that's observing. And so, what I usually kind of think about, and I actually do this, I follow this same process even after somebody has come to see me, so they've already made that step of saying, I need to see somebody with a mental health background. When it comes to a friend or a spouse, let's say you've gone through that process already where you've identified, I've noticed this.
Mhm.
Hey, I've noticed that. hey, what would you like to share with me that you're feeling, or what would you like to share with me with what your experience is? There comes a point at which you can actually say to that individual, it sounds to me like you're going through a rough time.
Mm.
How can I help you get help?
That's a
Notice,
great way to say it.
how can I help you go see a counselor?
Right. Yeah.
Like judgmental to a person that's already feeling defective. How can I help you get help?
Mm.
And the reason why that's so important is because very often folks that are already depressed, they haven't even thought about the fact, I need something.
Mm.
They intuitively know they need something, but
Yeah.
the biggest step is just saying, I need it from somebody else. And so what you're doing is you're simply implying to them at a very soft, gentle step, you might need help right now.
Mm-hmm.
I got to be honest, when we are having an emotional difficulty, when we're having a problem, we don't right away jump to, I need a therapist. And the reality is you don't always need a therapist up front.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you ask that person that you love, that you really care about, how can I help you get help? And let's say that they say, I just don't know. I don't know. That's when you can begin to say, I wonder if somebody to talk to would be helpful. Because remember, they might not say, I don't know. They might say, I just really need somebody to talk to. Can I talk to you?
Yeah.
And that may then lead into a stronger connection of trust. And I'm not saying that that person may not need help. What I am saying is it may take a little bit of time before they feel comfortable kind of accepting for themselves, you're right, I need help.
Mm.
Because there may come a point when you're working with somebody in that informal setting where then you have to confess, I don't know if I'm the one that can really help you. It sounds like you're struggling in a way that I don't understand either,
Yeah.
but I do know that you need help.
I'm
Is there a way?
fascinated by that,
Yeah.
Jim, because the difference, especially with friends, because friends can be very open about their psychological suffering. And then there's a very kind of tricky area when you begin to feel over your skis, like someone discloses something about doing something dangerous or a habit that's become so habitual that it's damaging their relationship. And then suddenly you've, developed this wonderful relationship, but you no longer have the skills to be able to help. Listening is not enough.
Right. And, part of the challenge here is there does sometimes come a point at which you're so worried about somebody that you may not be able to be gentle. There comes a point where you may have to be a little bit more directive. So, I'll jump to what you just touched on. What do you do when you think somebody's really at that point of potentially harming themselves? Well,
Right.
the first thing is to remember you're not being judgmental. You want to show that you really care, but you also want to kind of put it on the table. And one of the ways that you can do that is simply offer what your concern is. I'm worried about you
Mm.
and your safety. Is there something that I can do to help? Is there
Mm.
something that I can do to understand what is going on? Because what you're really kind of putting on the table is the fact that whatever it is that you're observing, whatever it is that they have said, is now making you feel like you have to really worry about them.
Yeah.
All of us sometimes have emotional symptoms that are so overwhelming that we just wish we could go away. We just
Mm.
wish that they could all end.
Mm.
And we sometimes wish, if I just wasn't here, if I wasn't around, if I was dead.
Mm.
The challenge is when you cross over to the point that you say to yourself internally, that internal narrative, I want to be dead,
Mm-hmm.
you're no longer thinking rationally.
Right.
How does the friend or relative get inside enough to know, gee, do I need to do something that I know they're going to be upset about, but the safety is so important that that now is overriding? I hope that kind of makes sense because
It's
it's
really good.
not
It's
very
really
well.
good stuff. And I was just on a Zoom call with some suicide loss survivors, a woman who had lost her husband to suicide and was dating again. And she was going through a process of breaking up with her boyfriend. And her boyfriend was, I think, in an effort to keep her around, threatening suicide. And I was thinking about, first of all, just the pure horror of having to relive that and somehow believe that you could somehow be responsible for someone else's decision to stay alive. And also, I didn't know what to tell her to say or do. Give us
Right.
some advice there.
The first thing that I would just say kind of, up front is anytime that somebody says, quote, I think I'm going to kill myself, or maybe I should just be dead, or maybe I should just die, that should be taken seriously. There can be a temptation to think, oh, they're just trying to manipulate me,
Mm.
or they are trying to get me to feel sorry, or they're trying to get me to do something. And the problem is, that might be true. That might be true. But if it's not true, then that person is really at risk. So the first thing is we should always take all threats and all, comments about that very seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Safety is the most important thing. People that are thinking that they might hurt themselves, or they're thinking of dying, or they're thinking of suicide, they're not crazy. They're not crazy.
Mm-hmm.
They're overwhelmed emotionally. So it makes
Yeah.
sense that they might not be thinking logically. And in fact, it's at those moments when you really have to show that you genuinely care about them. You care about them so much that you're willing to hurt them in the short run because
Mm.
you don't want to lose them in the long run.
I love the way you just framed that. I wish I had been able to come up with that line when I was speaking with her. It's fabulous. That is exactly what you have to do.
I've actually had patients in the office with me where I've said, you know what, we need to hospitalize you today.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be calling the hospital. I'm going to be making a referral. Can't let you leave. And I know they're angry.
Mm-hmm.
I've actually never yet had a patient come back later and tell me they were angry for caring about them. I
Mm-hmm.
have had them come back and tell me, you misunderstood what I said, or I really feel like you kind of controlled me.
Mm-hmm.
But I've never had them say, you didn't care about me. And in fact, that becomes the focus. And I share with them, I cared about you so much, and I didn't really know what was going on, that I could do the only thing I knew that was the most important, which was to not miss the fact that you might be hurting enough you'd really do something. And to this day, although I've had a couple of patients that have been very upset with me, I've never actually had a patient say, you just don't care about me, Dr. Polo. In fact, in the end, they've all said, okay, I get it. You cared about me.
Mm-hmm. Let's move on to say you have managed somehow to get the person to go into therapy. They have maybe received a diagnosis, maybe they've received some help with medication, and now they're living in your home and they're not showering and they're not getting up. They're not looking for work. If they've happened to have lost their job, they're not participating in life. How does one encourage a loved one who is living with a mental illness to continue on a path toward recovery?
Okay. This is a very challenging situation, very often for family members. Sometimes, as the outsider, we think that if somebody's gone to see somebody and they've gotten a diagnosis and they've gotten a prescription and they've got an appointment to go back, everything's now good.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, that's just the first step. And some of the disorders that folks have to live with kind of require that engagement over time, and they will go through, peaks and valleys in terms of whatever it is that they're experiencing. So as a family member, you got to remember, it's not a one and done type approach. Oh, they went to see a counselor and now all's good. Or, hey, they started them on this medication that's supposed to, help them, and it's all good. Some of the same principles still apply. You have to remember that this individual sometimes may not be thinking in the way that you are thinking. I noticed that some of that irritability is coming back. Have you noticed that?
Mm.
Okay. Or, gee, I'm noticing you're seeming down. Is that something you've noticed?
Mm-hmm.
And you can also very gently move that into, is that something you've been able to talk to John about? John might
Yeah.
be the therapist or something. Or, hey, I noticed you're not sleeping again. Is that something that you've mentioned to Dr. X? It's not,
Mm-hmm.
hey, you need to do something. It's not, hey, Dr. X needs to do something. It's simply, have you mentioned it? Because remember, when folks are struggling, they themselves fear it's coming back.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the way that you resist that fear is you pretend it isn't happening. And so if you can simply offer what you're observing in a non-judgmental way, you're kind of offering the opportunity for that individual to take control of owning it and perhaps maybe then doing something about it. And the best thing is for them to simply mention it to their treatment team.
Right. The behavioral components of both depression and bipolar disorder can be so harmful to family units. And I do wonder if you could just end today with a little bit of advice for the people who are charged with taking care of people who are sick.
So remember, I mentioned before that I'm a child psychiatrist, and one of the areas of my expertise is young kids with mood instability. I take a very firm approach against labeling them early. So even though I may think that they have some symptoms that look like it could be bipolar, I don't actually tell this child, hey, I think you have bipolar. And I rarely tell parents, your child has bipolar. But here's what I do to the family and to the parents. I remind them, hey, look, your loved one is struggling with mood instability. I would really strongly recommend that you try to understand and read about what that really means. Take more of an interest in trying to understand the full breadth of what that could mean, because you are going to go through this with them in terms of struggling.
Mm-hmm.
The more you understand, the less likely you are to be judgmental. And the reason why this becomes important with bipolar disorder is because, remember, bipolar disorder is one of those disorders which we don't cure.
Mm-hmm.
We treat it. We help keep people in a state of mood stability. And even under the best of circumstances, the people that have severe bipolar are still going to go through those peaks and valleys.
Mm-hmm.
And it isn't going to make sense to them, and it isn't going to make sense to the people around them. But if you read about this disorder so that you have a sense of knowing that that's actually part of what can happen, now you can get away from feeling like somebody did something wrong. Oh, you didn't take your medicine. Oh, you didn't follow the doctor's recommendations. No. This is just part of living with this, and we can go through this together.
Beautiful. Boy, we might have to revisit this topic, just because I'm going to get 1,000 questions from family members who support people with mental illness. And if you have those, you can email me directly at sheila.hamilton@beyondwell. I also just want to thank those of you who have given us a thumbs up. We are the fastest growing mental health podcast on Spotify. I think so much of it has to do with Dr. Polo's amazing voice and his incredible advice. So thank you, Dr. Polo. It's been so wonderful to catch back up again.
Sheila, it's always a pleasure. And I really just hope that all our listeners recognize that these topics are so important. It's all about just really, connecting with the people around us, the people that we love.